If I told you to name the type of enemies in horror games, your first thoughts would most likely be either something demonic, paranormal, or zombies. Having a human as something you fear isn't actually that common, with Manhunt being one of the notable releases to do this. After I pitched this game to Mike, he kind of replied with, why am I supposed to be afraid of normal people? And that was enough to make sure we were playing this game. I personally played it when it came out in 2005 on the Xbox 360. I can remember sitting in my basement in the dark, playing it and being terrified. Let's see if Condemned can still scare us in 2018. In the several seasons of this show, we're still running into weird situations we never thought were possible. With this game in particular, the situation is not really having a lot of information about why or how this game was made. We typically search non-stop for this kind of information, but it simply doesn't seem to exist here, and we can't seem to figure out why, as this was a pretty big release at the time. Condemned was released in 2005 by Monolith Productions, exactly 1 month and 5 days after the release of Fear, which was also developed by Monolith. Being an Xbox 360 launch title led to more sales and more attention than the game might have received otherwise. While the game received pretty positive reviews, most critics cited its story and lack of RPG elements or some type of progression as its faults, but praised its horror elements and combat. GameSpot said, quote, "Condemned's success in delivering the best-looking first-person melee combat of any game to date is truly admirable, along with its unusual premise. It's just that the longer you play, the more you'll wish that there was more substance to the experience." As far as other information on the development goes, sure, we can mention that this game uses the Lithtech Jupiter EX engine, which is the same engine Fear ran on, but considering both came out by the same company only months apart, means most people would assume it was something similar. The most we could pull up on the development is from a brief section on Wikipedia, which couldn't be verified anywhere else, minus a few details. So take it for what it is. The original working title of the game was The Dark. It included weird features like casting spells. These could be used to pull a gun from an enemy's hand, break open doors, and many other things. You can find footage of the game in this early state on YouTube. These spells, if implemented into the final version, would have taken the entire feel of the game away as we know it. The developers stated that they were inspired by movies like The Silence of the Lambs and Seven, and for the former you can really see the influence in terms of tone. One notable feature in this game is AI. The term devious AI is often used when describing Condemned systems. This is because each enemy has a different personality and will react differently in different situations. Whether it be trying to run away from you, finding a friend to help defeat you, or even dropping his weapon to get something stronger, the uncertainty of the enemy adds a new spin to artificial intelligence. After Condemned was released, we got a 6-part online game on the Condemned website. This served as a prequel to the series and ends right when the main game begins. We later got a sequel titled Condemned Bloodshot, which also came to the PlayStation 3. Released in 2008, it received mostly positive reviews, but critics heavily panned the game's addition of online multiplayer. Rumors of a third game have been around for many years. Sadly, one of the developers has stated that the game simply did not sell enough. Monolith co-founder Jace Hall currently owns the rights to Condemned. A few years ago on Facebook, he expressed his interest to find the right indie development team to, quote, "take over the franchise and move it forward." We play as FBI agent Ethan Thomas from the Serial Crimes Unit, or SCU, so we basically just hunt down psychopaths. The story starts with us arriving at the scene of a crime, an abandoned building, which is hinted at to be infested with drug addicts. After making it to the body, which is a disturbing scene featuring a mannequin and a tied-up woman, we meet our contact at the office, Rosa. This is also where we're introduced to the investigation aspect of the game. Upon examination, we come to the conclusion that the murder had to be done by the matchmaker, a serial killer who targets women and places them in scenes with male store mannequins. The police chief then smells cigarette smoke, which he assumes is from the murderer. We split up to go after the suspect when all of a sudden the lights go out, obviously. After locating the fuse box, we flip the switch to restore power, only to be electrocuted and thrown to the floor, losing our gun. A man then appears from the hallway and picks up the gun, which leads us to having to track him down and get the gun back. After we make our way through the building, we're hit in the back and pinned up against the wall by the fugitive, where he beats us up, all while explaining that we're both on the same path to righteousness. The two officers from earlier break into the room just in time to save us, but they get gunned down by the fugitive. He then hits us in the face and throws us out the window onto a car. We wake up on our couch and find a stranger, Malcolm Van Horn, waiting for us to gain consciousness. He explains that he was a friend of our father's and happened to see us get thrown onto a car the night before, and that the police are after us for the death of those two police officers since our gun was used. So let's take a moment to recap the story so far. A man who knows you happen to be walking by and witnesses you slamming into a car from 10 stories up. Instead of calling the police or paramedics, he drags your body to your apartment, which no one witnesses, and places you on the couch to wait for you to wake up, which, according to the time of day, means you've been out for about 24 hours. Then the police believe you murdered your colleagues because your gun was used, even though the one cop sent out a request for backup because they found someone in the building that could possibly be the murderer. On top of that, instead of questioning you on what happened, they're just assuming that it's all your fault and are willing to take you out without any formal investigative process. And on top of that, how does this guy know everything that's going on? It really seems like they needed to get you in trouble within the game, but couldn't really figure out how. So they just kind of threw things together until it made sense, I guess. Anyways, let's just get back to the story and be done with this section. It doesn't really get much better anyways. As we leave the apartment, we see a man in the opposing building wearing a jumpsuit and peering out, which could easily be assumed to be the man from earlier. It is then learned that the serial killer has been interested in our work and has been stalking us. While in a department store, we soon find the body of the matchmaker, set up in a similar way to the style of his own killing. There seems to be something else out there killing serial killers that we have to find, who we refer to as Serial Killer X. Because Serial Killer X goes after other serial killers, we have to race to find a man called the Torturer before Mr. X gets him. Our adventure leads us to an abandoned apple orchard where we believe the Torturer is. While at the orchard, we encounter a strange ninja-like person that disappears when we defeat him, which is pretty wacky. The Torturer is then found in a room dead by means of his own methods. Surprise, surprise. After all of that, we see Serial Killer X, who is the man from the very beginning that threw us through a window. Yet he's still at the house to kill the Torturer, meaning he wasn't the one who got to him first. We fight Serial Killer X throughout the house until we're hit in the head by Malcolm, the man we awoke to in our apartment. Through some dialogue, we learn that Serial Killer X is Malcolm's nephew, Leland, and that he believes he's just mentally sick and can be helped. We black out from a hit to the head and wake up in a stable, tied to the wall. Malcolm can be seen passed out in the background, and in typical bad guy fashion, Leland discusses his motives and everything. During this dialogue, we can see the ninja from earlier up in the rafters, though he doesn't do anything. Leland cuts off our pointer finger right before Malcolm wakes up and tackles him. He tells us that we need to find the one who created all of this madness and then defeat him. This leads to us running around the orchard with the ninja showing up here and there similar to Fear. We go through a few mini fights with him as we make our way through the level and then finally defeat him. This led us to wonder, well, we defeated the only person who seemed like a final boss, so now what? After more running around, we have to fight the ninja again, only to kill him again, which means we didn't kill him the first time, or there are more than one of these things running around. Finally, after more running around, we make it to a factory where we see the true boss, a man with spikes in his body that has a sword. In typical video game fashion, we have to go through 3 phases of a boss fight before he's finally killed, which should mean everything is back to normal. We get a ride back from Malcolm where he explains that we have defeated hate, and the killing should now be over. During this conversation, there's a thump heard from the trunk. Malcolm pulls over and opens the trunk, revealing Leland tied up. He tries to explain that he needs to keep trying to help him when we pull out our gun and aim it at Leland's head. Malcolm, not having any of it, pulls a gun on our head as well to stop us from doing anything. Several clones of hate suddenly appear and surround everyone. At this point, we have 2 options. Either shoot Leland or do nothing, in which Leland breaks free from the restraints, pulls a gun from who knows where, and shoots himself in the head. Either way, regardless of the decisions you make, there's no difference in the following scenes. Putting the decision here is pointless. After the gun goes off, we're seen in a diner where Rosa meets up with us to discuss what happened during the investigation, also informing us that she's wired. We're then in the bathroom where we proceed to throw up into the sink, while hate blinks in and out of existence behind us. He then jumps into our body, and we turn to face the camera, revealing that we're starting to resemble hate. So much to talk about, with really not that much even happening in this game. Although the character models do look a little dated, which isn't really a surprise, the environment and lighting effects are quite impressive for the time. Each level is very unique and the lighting, much like Fear, is very on point. The only thing that seemed a bit weird, but wasn't too noticeable, was that your flashlight would slightly shift in the direction you were turning before your body would move. We're not too sure where the flashlight is mounted, but it would seem like it should be more like a static light that moves with your body. When talking about a horror game, the music is usually just atmospheric tones and maybe some creepy sound effects here and there, and that's pretty much what we have here. However, when there is actually music being played, it sounds like it's straight up from a movie. There are some instances where the music is subtly placed under an atmospheric tone, but it all works well together to heighten the experience. The sound effects play a big role in this as well. There are several instances where you can hear footsteps, or even glass breaking in the distance. This allowed our brains to handle the fact that someone is about to be in front of us. But this system is quickly flawed when you realize you can't really hear the enemies running when they're close by, which means that the sounds you hear at a distance are specifically placed to add tension, instead of being an important part of the game. On the other hand, the voice acting is quite good. There are some instances where a character is supposed to be angry, and it just isn't believable, but normal dialogue between characters flows nicely. The main three voices, Ethan, Malcolm, and Rosa, are done by Greg Grunberg, John Armstrong, and Kimberly Colborn respectively. Each voice actor has quite an impressive resume in film and voice acting, which can easily explain why nothing really sounds off. This season we've dealt with horror-themed first-person shooters, and this is the only game to be very limited on the shooter theme. Although you'll occasionally find guns, they're typically only loaded with a handful of shots, and there's never any ammo around to pick up. This is done to make sure you're not running around the level, blasting everyone with a shotgun, and finishing the game with relative ease. Instead, Condemned makes you use melee weapons as much as possible. It's also the way you acquire the weapon which makes this game pretty unique. See that board on the wall with bolts sticking in it? You can probably rip it off the wall and use it as a weapon. Water pipe connected to the wall? Go ahead and rip it off. Although not everything you see can be used as a weapon, the list of items that can be pulled from your environment is actually quite impressive. And even if you do have a pistol or shotgun equipped, you get the option to toggle into melee mode with it. This means that you can fire bullets when you absolutely need to, and use the butt of the gun as a way to reserve ammo. However, this can backfire pretty quickly. Hitting people one too many times, or even blocking with the gun will damage the weapon, giving you a very limited amount of swings left before you have to find something else. The only melee weapon that causes any type of handicap was the shovel. Having this equipped will impair your vision on the right side of the screen, which comes down to you deciding on strength or vision. When you come up to another weapon, you'll get a small dialog box to compare the damage, speed, block, and reach of whatever weapon you're already holding. This is always represented with a plus or minus sign, with no actual values being given. Through some research for the script, we found that the strongest non-gun weapon is the fire axe and old axe, while the fastest weapon is the meat cleaver, which you only get for a short amount of time. But in all honesty, it just comes down to whatever you have available. The combat system is quite simple, but it will take you a while to master. Unlike most games where you can just run in and obliterate an entire room, here you have to time each attack and block perfectly. Hitting an enemy will cause them to react, such as stumbling around or falling, but the same reaction is done to you as well. This adds a bit of realism, since you can't just take a hit and keep mashing the attack button, as your character seems unfazed from the attack. And just like you, the enemies can also block attacks. All of this combined makes for an interesting fighting system, since you really need to learn what works best for each type of enemy. However, there are two weapons at your disposal to help you out during your fights: your foot and a taser. It's understandable that you hear that and you think, why wouldn't you always just use the taser? Which is what we thought as well. But there are situations where you just have so many people coming at you, the taser can't charge fast enough. But that doesn't mean we didn't use the taser every chance we got. It sometimes felt so unfair to just run up to an enemy, zap him, which will temporarily stun him, and smash him in the face with a weapon. It felt even more unfair when Rosa gives us an upgraded taser that knocks an enemy down with one shot, allowing you to run up and take one swing to kill them. There's also another feature to the fighting system which seemed cool at first, but lost its touch pretty early on. There's occasions where you can down an enemy, giving you an opportunity to run up to them, which will generate a prompt. Pressing a button between 1 and 4 will perform a specific execution, though the only real execution is snapping their necks. Everything else seemed like a move that would only knock them out temporarily, even though it does kill them. Aside from your weapons, the other set of items you have are your investigation tools. These tools help you with your investigations throughout the game, but more often than not, this just seems like padding. For instance, at the very beginning of the game, we are given a little tutorial with the investigation tools. This sounds a lot more complex than it really is. You only push one button to enter investigation mode, and your character will automatically have the tool needed for that area. But without fail, you'll almost always need to use your camera to take a picture of the evidence to send to Rosa. This part is just meaningless as you have to manually focus the camera before you can get the picture. It would be understandable to have this feature if you had to quickly focus and get the picture before an enemy attacks you, but that's just never the case. Using the investigation items will leave you vulnerable, and you'll have to switch to a weapon quickly if someone shows up. There are 3 specific situations where using the investigation items was nerve-wracking. The first being towards the beginning of the game where we enter a subway lobby. we have to use the device to locate a smell in a giant open area. The instant it prompted us to start investigating, I knew it would be a bad time. The second situation came at the mall. We had to use a device to illuminate a liquid on the ground. This liquid traveled throughout the building, and it was the only option if we wanted to get where we needed to be. Being in a single, wide open room was bad, but moving around an entire building while following a trail was even worse. And lastly was the orchard. In order to go the right way, you need to follow a trail of words written in invisible ink. This upped the ante even more, since our focus had to be mainly up at the roof, which means anyone could have charged at us, and we wouldn't have known until the last second. The orchard path also had one of the more annoying puzzles we had to do, if you want to call it a puzzle. It was too easy to get the paths mixed up, and having to start over again to make sure you were heading in the right direction was very annoying. Each level is linear, and we never visit the same location twice. It's interesting how many different environments they use to show that this is indeed a city we're investigating. The team could have easily reused levels, but instead chose to show the magnitude of this problem through several areas. The majority of your playthrough equates to about 99% walking and fighting and 1% story. The main purpose of each level is to push the story forward a little bit more, but that also means you'll be walking through a level for what seems like forever, only to get a few minutes of dialogue when you get to the next location. Throughout each level, you'll have the opportunity to find 2 different collectibles, 6 dead birds, and 3 metal pieces. Finding all of these collectibles will only really award you with concept art and a few videos showing pre-rendered models and some motion capture footage. To us, that's not even worth it to go through all the trouble of meticulously searching every level. But if you're the type of person that wants to get every achievement, or even just enjoy the concept art, then finding every item would be right up your alley. After every level, you're presented with a summary of how you did. This includes the number of collectibles you found, what weapon you favored the most, and your percentages of hitting and missing an enemy. Although nothing critical, it is kind of nice to see what weapons you used from level to level. It's odd that Monolith put out 2 horror games in the same year, with 2 extremely different styles. Although Fear didn't really hit it with the horror feel, aside from cheap jump scares, Condemned really picks up the slack and provides intense, nerve-wracking environments that have you on edge. The only fault we could really find was the weak storyline, but aside from that, we enjoyed every terrifying second of this game. We also realized that during this season we used the slice the pie technique that we learned about from Police Quest. It's weird that such a horrible game taught us something that we applied to future games, but we were definitely glad we knew about it for this game. It helped us a lot when it came to checking corners for potential jump scares. Condemned definitely holds up. It was surprisingly the only horror game in this season to actually be scary. Mike even mentioned that he jumped several times while rewatching footage to start editing, even though he had to play the game as well. If you enjoy games that keep you in suspense while walking around every corner, this game is for you. Wow!